morning and welcome to Primetime Live here on Jess TV and Jess FM. I am James Cousineau, your host, and it is June the 11th, 2026. Canada is standing at a historic and unprecedented crossroads regarding how our children interact with the modern world. Now, yesterday in Ottawa, I don't know if you were following this news, but Canadian Identity and Culture Minister Mark Miller tabled Bill C-34. As we look at this, it is unofficially known as the Safe Social Media Act. And if it's passed, it will bring sweeping piece of legislation that'll fundamentally rewrite the rules of Canadian internet by enacting a nationwide ban on social media accounts for children under the age of 16. Now, we are going to take a deep dive into this subject tonight. We're going to look at it from both sides, the positives and the drawbacks of such a bill. Because believe it or not, there are negative impacts of such a legislation being passed and such an act to be brought forward. So we're going to look at it from all sides. And again, we do, of course, encourage you to turn on your chat there in whatever program or platform you're watching us on this evening. And again, feel free to put your comments into that section. And at the same time, you can also give a call to the studio line 604-385-5093 and share your opinions that way, as well as a parent or even if you're a youth and you want to speak out about this change in legislation. But again, it is an important point that we look at this and decide how exactly we want to bring this bill in. Now, some people are going to be worried about privacy, about government overreach, and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's not the government that's going to be coming into your living rooms and into your phones and checking on what your children are doing. And that essentially is remaining up to the parents. However, what it will do is force the different platforms such as Facebook or Instagram and Twitter, formerly and now known as X, and so forth. Now, what it really comes down to is forcing the platforms, if they want to open up to a market of those users under the age of 16, they need to be able to prove to the government that they are changing the way that they do business, and in return, making sure that child safety and youth safety is paramount. Now, the government's message is loud and clear. And it's not just in Canada. Australia, about 6 months ago, passed similar legislation, but there are a few differences. And we'll get into comparing those two as the evening goes on here. But as I said, the government message is loud and clear. They claim that we are failing our children and that enough is enough. But while the same sentiment resonates deeply with millions of exhausted parents across the country, the execution of this bill launches Canada into a chaotic global debate over privacy, something, of course, we are rightfully concerned about. And it also brings into question some debate over tech enforcement and the true psychological state of our youth. When we look at this, and we will go deep into this, we'll also take a look at a couple of quick videos as well this evening to really understand the depth of this problem. But let's not be fooled. The problem with tech abuse, or what they're classifying as screen addiction, does not just apply to children and youth. It also applies to adults, and there are negative impacts on the mental health and the other health around social media addiction and screen addiction. So, we're going to look at that not only into how it impacts children and youth, but also how it's going to impact, or how it does impact, adults. Because at the end of the day, it's all about trying to reduce the impacts of this on all Canadians, not just children and youth, but all Canadians. And I think that in order to understand this bill, we need to very clearly understand what it means, what the goal is, and why it is changing the whole landscape when it comes to online use, whether it's social media, video games, and so forth. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to do a quick sponsor appreciation, and that this episode is once again brought to you by You guessed it, Carry Movers Limited. Whether you are relocating your family across town or moving your business to a brand new facility, the dedicated team at Carry Movers ensures a seamless, stress free transition. Trust the experts who care about your journey. Visit them today at www.carrymovers.com. That's Kary movers.com. We thank Carry Movers for their continued support of this program on Jess TV. Now, let's look at what this bill actually says. Unlike its predecessor, which was the Online Harms Act, which quietly expired when Parliament was prorogued back in 2025, Bill C-34 introduces a heavy handed enforcement mechanism. That is a big improvement in terms of how they want to follow through on this. Now, it proposes that there is a creation of a brand new regulatory watchdog, and that's going to be known as the Canadian Digital Safety Commission, or the CDSC. Now, the CDSC will have massive teeth, and that's going to be possessing the authority to fine non compliant tech giants up to 3% of their global annual revenue. Under the bill, platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and X, or Twitter, whichever you want to call it by, are ordered to shut out under 16s entirely, unless those platforms can prove to the Commission that they are safe by design. That is a highly anticipated exception, and one that we don't see in terms of the bill that's similar that was passed in Australia. Now, with this, as I said, the exemption process where the platforms must demonstrate that they have eliminated the predatory algorithms, the endless scrolls, and toxic feedback loops. But Canada is not inventing the wheel. As I said, we are trailing a massive stone already thrown across the Pacific. When we look at the Australian blueprint versus the Canadian pivot, there are some notable changes or notable differences. Now, to understand where Canada is heading, we have to look directly at Australia. On November the 29th, 2024, the Australian Parliament passed the landmark Online Safety Amendment, and that was also known as the Social Media Minimum Age Act, which officially came into effect 6 months ago on December the 10th, 2025. Now, Australia acted as the world's ultimate canary in the technology coal mine. Their law imposed standard fines of up to 49.5 million Australian dollars on tech companies failing to take reasonable steps to bar children under 16. Now, let's look at the data that's coming out of Australia right now, 6 months into their grand social experiment, and compare it to the framework that Canada introduced yesterday. This is, of course, a bit of difference in what we're seeing. Now, the minimum age is a strict 16 years old, both in Australia and in Canada. When we look at the parental consent opt out options, it's not an option in either Canada or in Australia. Just plain and simple, under 16s are banned. Parents cannot waive the rule. That is, again, both in Canada under Bill C-34 and in Australia under their Protection Acts. Then we look at the maximum corporate penalty. Again, in Australia, it's $49.5 million Australian dollars is their maximum corporate penalty. Meanwhile, Canada's Bill C-34 is looking at a 3% fine of global revenue. The exemption clause. Now, where that comes into play is that there is absolutely no exemption clause when it comes to the Australian policy and the Australian Act. In Canada, however, it's going to differentiate slightly because they will be allowed to remove the age restriction if the platform proves that they are safe by design. And again, we covered that just a moment ago about what safe by design actually means in this factor. And then you have the treatment of AI chatbots. They are excluded from the age ban in Australia. In Canada, the AI chatbots will also be excluded from the age ban, subject to crisis rules. So there will be rules in place that deal with the AI chatbots. Now, when we look at the initial impact in the scope, it has brought 4.7 million youth accounts to be purged by mid December of 2025. And with that said, They have not only eliminated those accounts and blocked them, but now they're looking at ways to prevent youth from getting back online. Because let's face it, it's approximately 75% of youth in Australia that are finding workarounds in order to get back online. But there are some very serious privacy concerns and safety concerns around kids being able to get online and use this information, or to prove that you are 16 years of age or older. So, again, some serious concerns here about what that would look like. And we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. But as the table illustrates, Canada's Bill C-34 leaves the escape hatch that Australia didn't cover, and that was, as I said, the safe by design exemption. Minister Miller notes that if a platform can completely re engineer its environment, removing the toxic elements, it might earn the right to host younger teens. And again, why is that important? Well, because there is a lot of money to be had by the younger users. And that is in terms of advertising, it's in terms of screen time spent on there, and a lot more. But furthermore, both nations have intentionally exempted private messaging apps like WhatsApp, online video gaming networks, and educational platforms such as Google Classroom. But while the law targets traditional social platforms, the early data out of Australia reveals a deeply complicated reality. On one hand, tech companies scrambling to comply. The other side is Meta alone, reporting that they purged roughly 4.7 million Australian accounts in the weeks surrounding the December 25th deadline, or sorry, December 2025 deadline. On the other hand, the enforcement is turning out to be incredibly messy. Just yesterday, on June the 10th, reports emerged highlighting deep parental frustration in Australia. Tech companies have turned to invasive biometric age verification, forcing kids to upload government IDs or use AI facial age scanning apps. Now, what's that information being used for, and how is it being stored? How is it being secured? We don't know. And that is worse yet. Tech savvy teenagers are bypassing the block entirely by using virtual private networks or VPNs, or just migrating to alternative, unmonitored digital underground forums. There are underground forums with absolutely no capacity for screening or for the algorithms to search out harmful content. Now, consumer groups are already warning Ottawa that this is a blanket ban that could create a false sense of security while driving vulnerable youth into the darker corners of the web where no safety commissions exist. Again, a huge, huge online safety concern. Now, when we look at this, we also want to look at the different countries and how they're basing their legislative status, and that's regarding youth social media bans. So we're going to look at that because the fire is spreading beyond Ottawa and Canberra, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to bring a video up on screen and share with you, and this has to do with exactly how the the screen time is impacting children and youth, and to look at the both short-term and long-term impacts of screen addiction when it comes to not just social media, but just all different types of media online, including YouTube videos and all of these short format items as well. So again, it's important to understand how this is impacting people and what there are some options. And we're also going to take a look at a local TEDx talk that was done by a young man by the name of Mr. Tanner. And he is a kid who talks about uh, personal experiences pertaining to social interaction with, as a kid. And that's also something that he talks about, cell phone addiction. So we'll talk about, or we'll view that video a little later on in the episode. But as we continue, of course, we wanted to be able to ensure that our viewers get a full picture. And we're going to be covering, as I said, we're looking at both sides of this argument because it's important to understand that even with the safety and the good intentions that this may bring, there are also some very serious concerns that come with this with this new act or regulations as well. So again, something that we have to be very cognizant of in dealing with the online issues and security, age gaps, and the impacts long term as well. So again, something that we really have to watch. So let's take a look at the first video here, and we're going to take a look at the psychology of screen addiction.
You've tried warnings, you've tried taking the phone away, but nothing seems to work. And deep inside, you're asking, why is my child so addicted? And what can I do before it's too late? Stay with me till the end of this video, because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see screen addiction and how you handle it. As a child psychologist and parenting coach, I've worked with hundreds of children and families, and I want to tell you something very important. Your child is not weak. You are not a bad parent. This is not just bad behavior. This is brain science. Screen addiction is designed, and until you understand the psychology behind it, you will keep fighting the wrong battle. Section 1. What screen addiction really is. Let's redefine the problem. Screen addiction is not just too much phone or too much TV. It is a dopamine-driven behavioral dependency, a habit loop wired into your child's brain, a replacement for real-life emotional needs. Every time your child scrolls, watches, or plays, their brain releases a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good chemical. But here's the problem. Screens deliver fast, easy, constant dopamine. Real life delivers slow, effort-based dopamine. So the brain starts choosing easy pleasure over meaningful growth, and slowly, your child loses interest in reading, studying, playing outside, conversations, even imagination. This is not laziness. This is neurological conditioning. Section 2. Why kids get addicted faster than adults. Children's brains are still developing, which means they have low impulse control. Their reward system is highly sensitive. They struggle to delay gratification. So when a child is exposed to fast-moving videos, bright colors, instant rewards, likes, wins, levels, their brain becomes overstimulated. And here's the dangerous part. The brain starts needing more stimulation to feel normal. That is how addiction forms. So when you remove the screen, they become irritable. They feel bored, they act restless, or even aggressive. Not because they are stubborn, but because their brain is experiencing a dopamine crash. Section 3. The hidden emotional reason. Now let me take you deeper. Because screen addiction is not just biological, it is also emotional. Many children use screens to escape. Boredom, loneliness, stress, lack of attention, lack of connection. Sometimes the screen is not the problem. The screen is the solution the child has found. A child who feels unseen, unheard, unstimulated, over-controlled will naturally run to screens because screens provide control, excitement, escape, reward. So if we only remove the screen but do not address the emotional need, the addiction will return in another form. Section 4. What screen addiction is doing to your child. Let's be honest, this is serious. Research has shown that excessive screen exposure in children can lead to reduced attention span, poor academic performance, sleep disruption, delayed social skills, increased anxiety and irritability. But one of the most dangerous effects is this. Your child loses the ability to enjoy real life. And when that happens, motivation drops, creativity dies, discipline weakens. This is why many parents say, "My child is no longer the same." Section 5. The biggest mistake parents make. Most parents fight screen addiction like this. Stop it. Give me that phone. No more TV. But this approach fails. Why? Because you are trying to remove the behavior without replacing the reward system. The brain does not work that way. You cannot remove something that gives pleasure and replace it with nothing. That is why your child keeps going back. Section 6. 5 powerful, practical solutions. Now let's talk about what works. These are not theories. These are psychologically proven strategies. 1. Replace, don't just remove. If you take away screens, you must replace them with physical play, creative activities, problem solving tasks, real life fun. The key is make real life more engaging than the screen because the brain will always choose what feels better. 2. Create dopamine balance. Your child needs both high stimulation, fun, low stimulation, calm activities. Introduce reading time, quiet play, reflection moments. This resets the brain's reward system. 3. Set structure, not punishment. Instead of random rules, create clear routines. Screen time only after responsibilities. No screens before school. No screens 1 hour before bed. Children thrive with predictable structure, not emotional reactions. 4. Build connection before correction. Before you say, drop the phone, ask, how are you feeling? What do you enjoy about this game? Connect first, because a connected child listens more. 5. Model the behavior. This is the hardest truth. If your child always sees you on your phone, scrolling endlessly, distracted, they will copy you. Children don't follow instructions, they follow examples. Section 7. A powerful shift in mindset. Stop seeing your child as addicted. Start seeing your child as a brain being shaped, a child seeking reward, a human needing connection. When you change how you see the problem, you change how you solve it. Let me leave you with this. The goal is not to raise a child who can live without screens, but to raise a child who is not controlled by them. You are not too late. Your child is not lost. The brain can be rewired, habits can be changed, connection can be rebuilt, and it starts with
Guess it would help if I turn my mic back on, folks. Sorry about that. I always forget to do that when we switch over. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. But again, it just shows how important that foundational development is for children and youth. And even though the video showed just mainly younger children, the impacts that we were discussing actually impact small children right up to adolescents and teenagers. So again, very important to keep that in mind. When you move from that and you look at how the impact draws on the adult brain, the screen time can have an impact there as well. And Stanford University has put out a publication that we'll take a look at, and it explains what excessive screen time can do for adults. Because I think that if we are looking at this Online Safety Act, we also need to understand that it is not just impacting children and youth. We need to look at it from a point of what it does to the adult brain. Because at the same time that you are trying to reduce the reliance for communication, for socialization, and such for your children, at the same time, they're watching what you're doing, and you are setting the example and setting the standard. So if you are telling them that they are not allowed online or particularly social media and trying to cut back on the screen time, then you need to do the same to set that prime example. So again, they watch what you do. But let's take a look here at this publication from Lifestyle Magazine, and again, that comes from Stanford University, very well respected Ivy League school that really has shared this with us. So we're going to again thank them, thank Stanford for sharing this and for putting it out because it's really important to understand the dynamics here. Now, as I said, it is not just the child's brain; it is the adult brain. So let's make sure, yeah, that's showing up, and I'll actually increase the size here for you folks so that you can read it a bit better on your screen if you can. And you can always feel free to pause as well as we go through this. So, once more, this is from Stanford Medicine, and it's important to understand what this says. And it doesn't mean that it's going to have the same impact when you look at the withdrawal of people from social settings or the reliance on screen time and the reduced capacity to work or productivity in the workplace. Again, there is such a wide range, but this shows what it can do. And let's take a look here. So, binge watching television, watching YouTube videos, or scrolling on your phone every morning may seem harmless, but research shows that too much screen time may be detrimental to your health. And again, we're talking about adults now. We know that children's brains are affected by spending too much time glued to their cell phones. However, research shows that adult brains are also negatively impacted by excessive screen time. This is defined as more than 2 hours a day outside of your work hours. So, again, when you're in a mindset of working and utilizing, whether you are a social media manager or you're just someone who is using a computer a lot, that again is excluded from this point because it is we're talking about your workplace, but now in terms of the screen addiction, we're talking about social media and the non-functional or the non-productive parts of your screen time. So too much screen time can impact the health in a myriad of ways, ranging from eye strain and neck pain to isolation to mental health issues. And in some cases, it causes physical harm to our brains. Now, this is what we will take a peek at here because it's very important to understand. The eyes are directly connected to the brain. And Loeffler encourages us to think about our eye health to ensure overall brain health. Rather than looking at our phones upon waking, Loeffler recommends starting each morning looking at the horizon or an object outside of a far away, that's far away outside a window. And that helps to prevent eye strain when you do that, not only when you're getting up in the morning and taking a break from the for the first hour from social media. Don't automatically go for your phone, log onto your computer and such. Instead, try something different. Get up, read a book, have your coffee and your breakfast and socialize with your family, whatever that takes. But again, avoiding that screen time when you first wake up. And then you can look at different points. And the American Academy of Ophthalmology does have what they call the 20-20-20 rule. And that just divides this up into the three sections that suggests that individuals look at something 20 feet away or further for 20 seconds every 20 minutes of the day. So, if you're especially important if you're working on a computer all day, very important. Now, what's happening to the brain during the screen time? And this was a link from springer.com that you can find as well. So you can read that in more depth as we're just covering it very quickly here. But it found that increased use of screens among adults may be harming to the learning, to memory, and mental health, as well as the potential to increase early neurodegeneration. So, again, it's a big, big concern. The study shows that in adults aged 18 to 25, excessive screen time can also cause thinning of the cerebral cortex. And that's the brain's outermost layer responsible for processing memory and cognitive functions such as decision making and problem solving. So, again, very big impact for those aged 18 to 25. So, we're looking not just at what Bill C-34 will cover for children, but also just making you aware of the continued risk as you get older as well. Now, another study that was done or posted on sciencedirect.com, you're welcome to check that out, found that adults who watch television for 5 hours or more per day had an increased risk of developing brain related diseases like dementia, stroke, or Parkinson's. So, again, big, big findings. Now, the study found that excessive screen time can hinder sleep, especially when looking at screens late at night. Light from the screen can delay melatonin release from the brain's pineal gland, and that is impacting the body's natural circadian rhythm. and it causes difficulty sleeping. So, again, that's where you try to avoid screen time before bed. And the general consensus is to turn the screens off an hour before bedtime, or shut your kids off their computers and their gadgets an hour before their bedtime. Now, gray matter is brain tissue essential for human functioning and is responsible for engagement of stress management, and that is crucial. Passive screen time is like eating sugar, but for your brain. It tastes good and you know you want it now, but you're not actually feeding yourself. You're not giving your brain any nutrition. And instead, replace the screen time with an intentional, healthy habit that feeds your brain in a healthy way. Different lifestyle medicine activities like exercise, good sleep, social connections, stress management, functions like nutrition for your brain and for your mental health. So, again, getting off the screen. Specifically, though, Loeffler cautions us not to pick up the phone after the alarm goes off in the morning. As I said, looking at our email and social media on our phones while still in bed just jolts the nervous system and can trigger fight or flight responses since we're not fully awake yet. So, also look at it and say, okay, I'm going to just leave the phone for now. I'm going to get up, have my coffee, have my breakfast, whatever the case may be, your shower and such. And this way you are looking at changing that pattern that you've already created. And you're going to want to do that because when you do this, every morning, you're creating that pattern and can set the fight or flight mode response as your default mode of operation. So not only does this behavior set an anxiety filled tone for the entire day, you're also training your brain to be more hypervigilant in general. So, again, a big, big concern. So, again, leave the phone alone when you first get up in the morning. Now, try that for a month. See how you adjust to it and see how it feels. Now, they recommend the no screen time for the first hour of the day to support that cognitive enhancement. Instead, what they're suggesting is engaging in that lifestyle medicine activity that we talked about. Exercise, use the phone, but call somebody. Call a family member, call a friend, just to have that social interaction where you're not staring at the screen. So, again, don't do a video call, just do an old fashioned phone call and have a discussion. Get the brain functioning, get that interaction and the social development going on for your children as well. uh, just mediate, do whatever it takes or whatever feels good to you that is a replacement. So, again, that's from Lifestyle Medicine Magazine and courtesy of Stanford University. So, again, that just kind of gives you a backdrop as to how the impacts are on the adult brain. So we don't want to think that we're just focused on the child brain. We want to be looking at the adult brain as well. Now, let's take a look at the global landscape as it stands in the summer of 2026 as we approach here. In the United Kingdom, under the Online Safety Act, the UK has already heavily regulated age gating for explicit material. However, following Canada's move this week, the British lawmakers are facing intense internal pressure to upgrade their rules and to a total social media ban for under 16s. The European Union, France and Spain so far have pioneered digital sovereignty laws requiring parental verification for anyone under 15. Though enforcement has remained fragmented, Denmark and Spain are actively reviewing the absolute under 16 ban model. Then in the United States, well, of course, there's a chaotic patchwork because federal legislation like the COPA 2.0 has stalled in Congress due to its fierce First Amendment challenges. Individual states have taken matters into their own hands. However, unlike Canada's unified federal push, US state laws are facing a lot of backlash and legal challenges in the court systems that again deal with the concerns over the infringement on the rights again. So it's just looking at how it's going to impact and how it's going to be implemented when it comes to the US, because they're again the states are facing constant injunctions from tech coalition groups. They're arguing that age checks violate free speech and user privacy when it comes to even children. Now, In South America and Asia, when you look at Brazil and Malaysia, they have fast tracked distinct age based verification frameworks this year, directly citing the rising tide of algorithmic exploitation. What we are witnessing is the fragmentation of the global internet. The borderless web is hitting a hard wall of state enforced age verification checkpoints. What does that mean? Well, we need to look at, again, the deconstruction of the science of digital addiction. We've already looked at the video, we've gone through that information, but to keep the report genuinely balanced, we have to look past the political grandstanding and focus on hard science. What does the empirical data actually say about screen time, video games, and social media addiction across different age groups? Because digital addiction is a medical reality. Or is it just a moral panic used by politicians to secure votes and to advance the opportunity for government and corporations to gather more data? Now, first, let's look at the neurological reality. When a child, youth, or adult scrolls through an endless feed or hits an achievement marker in a video game, the brain releases that dopamine that we talked about earlier. That's the neurotransmitter intrinsically linked to reward, pleasure, and habit formation. Social media platforms rely on the psychological mechanism known as variable reward schedule. The exact same mechanism that makes slot machines in Vegas or slot machines anywhere. It makes them addictive. You don't get a reward every time you pull the lever or scroll the feed, but the anticipation of the reward keeps you hooked. Let's break down the real facts and the clinical data across generations. And let's break it down so that we look at this again from different age groups, including adults, because I want to be very fair on how we look at this. According to clinical studies, social media addiction in youth, particularly adolescent girls, presents highly uh, throughout the lens of social anxiety, body dysmorphia, and depression driven by peer comparison metrics like shares, views, likes. And then we have video game dependency, heavily prevalent in young boys. That triggers an entirely different neurological loop, the desire for competence, control, and social status within the virtual communities. Now, what is the diagnostic reality? Well, in youth, true clinical internet gaming disorder affects an estimated 3 to 5% of young gamers globally. It is characterized by a complete inability to stop playing, even when school, health, and family relationships completely deteriorate. So, again, it's a small number, 3 to 5%. But again, if you look at that in totality, that is a large number of people. It is also profoundly hypocritical to treat this strictly as a kid's issue. Let's look at the impact of adults 19 and over. Adults are equally ensnared by social media, by algorithmic designs, through the consequences that manifest differently. When we look at the productivity drain, for adults, addictive digital loops typically target professional productivity and emotional stability. Doom scrolling, as we know it, the act of obsessively scrolling through negative news feeds, has been clinically linked to heightened generalized anxiety disorders and systemic insomnia in adults. The social isolation paradox that we're looking at is that while adults use social platforms under the guise of staying connected, high volume usage correlates heavily with chronic loneliness and fractured attention spans, fundamentally damaging an adult's capacity for deep, sustained focus in the workplace. The core takeaway from this medical community is clear. The human brain, regardless of age, did not evolve to process a non-stop, hyper-optimized stream of emotionally volatile stimuli. It is what we have to look at and the reality of it. Now, before we get on to looking at the next phase here, which is the enforcement nightmare and the balance beam, let's take a quick peek at another quick video that I wanted to show you that has to do with the TEDx talk that I was speaking of earlier, because this is a young a young teenager. He is doing a TEDx talk and he's talking to people about the cell phone addiction, about screen addiction, and the fact that it's not just the kids, and the fact that, you see it everywhere you go. And it has totally changed our human interactions, even when we are sitting face to face with another individual right in front of us. So let's take a look at this because I thought that it was good. And I'm not going to play it all, but I will tell you that if you want to watch it all, it's available on the net, and it's TEDx Langley, and so let's just pause that for a second while I bring it up on your screen so you can actually see it as well as hear it. And I think again, it's very cool because it comes from a young individual who actually does it very well. He's does it uh, much better TED talk than some of the adults I've seen. So, very uh, big kudos to this individual for doing this TED talk and sharing it online because again, I think it's very important. So let's take a look at that.
Did you know that 80% of children check their phones every 5 minutes? Crazy, right? Hi, everyone. My name is Tanner Welton, and today I'm going to be talking to you about cell phone addiction. Now, I may have an addiction myself, but that doesn't mean I can't talk about it. In fact, who knows it better than me? There are many people with addictions to different things, but in my opinion, cell phone addiction is a number one worry. Now, hold on a second. I'm sure many of you are thinking that that's not me. I'm not addicted. Now take a second to think about how many times a day you use your phone or just check your phone. What happens to you when you lose your phone? Are you calm and settled or do you freak out? There are actually people who have a panic attack. It's called nomophobia, or as I personally like to call it, nophonobia. It is when you panic if you don't have your phone in your pocket or you can't find it. I've seen this happen on many occasions in our house. But don't feel alone. In fact, there are 1.5 billion people in China. 24 million of them are suspected to be addicted to technology. That is almost 3/4 of Canada's population. It is so crazy that parents are putting their children into institutions to detoxify them of technology. But they are not the only ones having this problem. It's happening in Britain, Spain, and several other countries. And I believe that these detox centers will soon be in Canada. Now, the big question is, why are people so addicted? Well, here's my answer. Take social media for an example. Every single
So again, you can watch the whole video. I won't show it all just because, in the interest of time, and because I'd like you to watch it all on your schedule. But check that video out because it's a really good TED talk, and it just coming from a young teenager. I think that it really is important to not only look at it and what you can learn from it, but you can also share it with your children and your teenagers because they'll be able to relate to this individual a bit more, being that it is one of their peers or someone who is within the age bracket. So again, check that out. I really do encourage it. But as we go and look at analyzing the sheer scale of Bill 34, C-34, that is, there is the enforcement nightmare and the balance beam. Now, we must confront the looming operational nightmare because how does a government actually enforce this without building a massive intrusive digital surveillance apparatus? And for this, if social media companies must verify that every single Canadian is over 16 that hits their platform, they require data. And this means that every Canadian citizen could eventually be forced to hand over third party facial scans, biometric profiles, or even digital health cards to foreign tech companies just to log in to an account. The privacy implications are immense. We're trading our children's algorithmic vulnerabilities for a complete loss of data privacy. Furthermore, let's look into the human element because this is a very big concern as well. When we look at that, we can look at marginalized youth, including rural teens, LGBTQ plus youth in unsupportive households, and kids with rare health conditions. Social media is their only lifeline to a supportive community. A total ban, as consumer advocates point out, severs those vital connections completely. This is why Canada's inclusion of the Safe by Design clause is so critical. It shifts the burden. Instead of forcing the government to police every child or forcing parents to become IT security experts, it demands that big tech fundamentally change how their products are engineered. If a platform wants Canadian users under the age of 16, it must disable the infinite scroll. It must kill the predatory recommendation algorithms, and it must turn off the notifications that buzz at 3 o'clock in the morning. Before we offer our final thoughts tonight, let's also take a quick reminder that there may be other ways to deal with a part of this problem. And that is, again, the government is using this as a tool to not punish families, to not punish youth, to not force them to be off forever. Instead, what they're doing is using this as the stick and the carrot approach to tech giants. Tech giants that have been using the algorithms and the psychology and the dopamine releases in order to addict the children and adults to their platforms. If this forces them to stop operating in this manner, then I think that we have a win. But again, at what cost? My concern is the fact that there are a lot of people out there who utilize the social media platforms of all ages in responsible ways. I see it where people utilize it to keep in touch with others. People with social anxiety issues that are able to communicate on their pace and their schedule online. And again, people with social anxiety are not just adults, they're children and youth as well. So I think that encompassing regulations that force these social media platforms to change is great. But again, we have to be concerned about these non regulated different platforms that may be on the dark web or just floating online in different areas that are not picked up and detected as social media platforms. Again, there comes a huge risk. When you start looking at these unregulated platforms, then of course you're going to look at predators and such who may use them as well, creating a bigger safety concern than what we had before. So it's important to not rush into decisions, but at the same time, look for solutions. In the final aspect of looking at this problem, do you think, like I do, that more parental education around social media safety and dangers could go a long way instead of needing to bring in C34? I think that maybe a cautionary balance of both, holding them accountable for activity that targets the algorithmic, basically being algorithmic predators, at least social media companies. I think targeting them while still allowing the freedom of all individuals to be able to utilize the tools online, but to force changes in the architecture of that software. That's, something to consider. I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comment section because this is a huge topic that does not just affect all Canadians, it affects people around the world. And before we finish off tonight's show, let me just once again give a sponsor appreciation uh, to our sponsor for this episode, as well as many others. Primetime Live is brought to you by Carry Movers Limited, available online at www.carrymovers.com. That's Kary movers.com. Moving your life can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to. Carry Movers Limited pairs decades of residential and commercial moving experience with an unwavering commitment to customer satisfaction. From careful packing, secure transport, they handle your worldly possessions with the utmost respect. Discover the services and the smooth moving solutions at www.karymovers.com. That's carrymovers.com. Now, let's take a look at our closing thoughts and the path ahead. As Bill C-34 begins its long, highly contested journey through the House of Commons and the Senate, Canadians are left to ponder a fundamental question. What kind of digital world do we want to raise the next generation in? The age of unchecked, Wild West internet consumption is officially coming to a close. Whether through Canada's legislative blueprint, Australia's rigid enforcement, or Europe's digital sovereignty push, the global consensus has a unified objective, and that is protecting youth mental health. And that is considered by many to be now a matter of national security. But a law passed in Ottawa cannot replace the difficult conversations that need to happen at your kitchen table from coast to coast to coast. Legislation can block an app, but there are ways around it. It cannot teach digital literacy. It cannot model healthy online behavior, and it definitely cannot replace the simple, invaluable gift of our undivided attention. When we continue to track every amendment, we'll bring those reports to you. We'll track every corporate pushback and every clinical update on Bill C-34 right here as the story unfolds. We'll keep you posted. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive on Primetime Live. I am James Cousineau reporting for Jess TV and Jess FM. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, both online and offline. You've been watching Primetime Live on Jess TV. I encourage you to not only like this episode, but share it with others. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next week, 8 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. I'm James Cousineau. Stay safe, everyone.